Well done.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee here today on the 24th of November. Could we start off with item 1 and apologies?
Apologies, Chair, from Conor Wileman, Richard Ford and Johnny McMahon.
Thank you for that. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Item 3, the minutes of the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 24th of October. Has everyone had the opportunity to see them and read them? Is everyone happy that they're an accurate record?
Yeah.
I'll sign them then. Thank you for that. Item 4, Regional Permanency Partnership and Pilot Project Outcomes. Mark, did you want to open this?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I've got with me this morning Scott, who will go through the details of the actual report as he leads on the regional arrangements. So, July of last year, you were briefed on the new arrangements for the delivery of the regional adoption agency for ourselves, Stoke-on-Trent, Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin. And having a regional arrangement is not unique around the country. In fact, the vast majority of areas have a regional arrangement, and that was a push from government. So this will provide today an update on the progress of these arrangements, and we refer to our regional adoption agency as Together for Children Permanency Partnership, and it was launched at the end of September 2020. And Scott will go through some of the key headlines in the report, and then I'm sure we'll be able to, between us, answer questions that members of the committee have.
Thank you for that. Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. So, as Councillor Sutton said, we launched in September 2020. We were due to launch in April 2020, but the minor issue of the global pandemic slightly got in the way of that. So, whilst we were slightly delayed in launch, we did a huge amount of partnership activity actually over the initial phases of the pandemic in terms of delivering support to adopted children and adoptive families as a partnership together. So the launch did happen successfully in 2020, and thank you for inviting me back here today, obviously to update on what throughout 2020, 21-22, sorry, that's the first year that the Together for Children partnership has operated, so the first full year cycle in terms of reporting, financial arrangements, etc. So I'm going to be updating the committee today in terms of what those outcomes have been over the last 12 months specifically, but well, we've been operating now for just over 2 years. So just in terms of our kind of key aims, obviously we came together as a partnership, as Councillor Sutton said, under the auspices of the government's regionalising adoption agenda. So that work started in 2018. There's an incredible amount of development work, putting together what is really quite a complex service delivery model across 4 local authorities. We're not a fully hosted model, so we're one of 32 regional adoption agencies now operating across England, and I guess the majority have gone for a fully hosted model where one local authority delivers all of the adoption service functions. We chose not to do that, so we have a central hub which is hosted by Staffordshire. Staffordshire are the legal hosts of Together for Children. And the central hub delivers all those functions that we see merit in delivering pan-regionally. And then each local authority is responsible for what we call the delivery from their locality hub. So things like the assessment and approval of adopters in their locality, that work is undertaken in each of our 3 bases across our 4 local authorities. And more specifically, our support to children and adoptive families happens at a locality level. We always felt that it was really important not to disconnect those services from the more universal and targeted services that exist in local authorities for children and families already. So that's why we went for that kind of pure partnership model as opposed to a fully hosted model of delivery. So our key aims are obviously to kind of utilise the resource collectively of those 4 local authorities to recruit, assess and support prospective adopters across our region. We want to provide children with more choice in terms of the pool of potential adoptive families that we have, so that we're better able to match children's needs and adoptive families. And also bringing together our resource capacity in terms of our ability to deliver adoption support functions. So adoption support is a really often overlooked function of regional adoption agencies and adoption agencies per se. And a lot of our activity is actually around supporting families where children have been placed for adoption. And just to say that the partnership was also formed with a vision of having some kind of broader ambitions in terms of supporting children's permanency more generally. And we've been doing some key bits of work around that. I'll come back onto it, but the Mockingbird fostering model is a piece of work that Together for Children as a partnership has delivered, working across the 4 fostering services within the local authorities in our partnership. So as I've already said a little bit about central permanency hub and the locality functions, that's the way that the partnership is structured and organised. There's a high level of governance within that arrangement, so there's a board that is chaired by the current DCS in Telford and Wrekin, Joe Britton. That's represented by all of the assistant directors who've got responsibility for adoption in their portfolios. There's a senior leadership team that I manage that consists of the heads of service with responsibility for adoption across the 4 local authorities. And then there are various other boards such as data and performance and finance that again are collective partnership governance boards formally written into our legal arrangements in terms of the oversight and governance of the arrangement. So coming on to performance for 21-22, I think I shared as an appendix the full annual report. So the detail is in there. I will take out some of the key headlines, and I'll be quite happy to go into further depth around any of these areas if there are any questions from members. So just to say, some of the performance indicators in relation to adoption are very much looking in the rear-view mirror, because it takes a long time for a child who enters care to ultimately become adopted. There are targets, national targets, but when we're only reporting on the cohort of children who received an adoption order in the year 21-22. So the activity for those children may well have started some way back, and in many cases in this report, the activity for those children would have started before the commencement of Together for Children. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, all of the performance figures are good for Staffordshire in terms of timeliness for children, but you know, they could be better, and I guess what we want to recognise is that all of these children will have been caught up in the pandemic, you know, in terms of the major changes and shifts in practice that all local authorities, children's services had to make, including ourselves as an adoption agency, during that period of time. So I think the fact that Staffordshire's performance has held up is, you know, a real credit to the whole of the children's system. You know, I'm not claiming that from Together for Children's perspective. I'll claim the good bits that we've contributed to that, but clearly that's a reflection of the whole children's social work system during that time. So, in terms of activity and performance then, clearly recruitment of prospective adopters is one of our key aims. So bringing our resources together has really allowed us to rethink how we do that. So we've built a new website. We do most of our marketing recruitment activity through social media now. So, we've stopped doing expensive advertising in newspapers and billboards. We very much focus on targeted recruitment through social media campaigns, and that is proving to be very, very successful. We had 720 inquiries from potential adopters during last year, and that led to 140 households being referred through to our assessment teams to consider beginning the formal process of the adoption assessment and approval. So last year that led to 83 adopter approvals. The year before that was 102. We had an exceptionally good year, as many regional adoption agencies did, and we're not quite sure of that. We think that the uplift might have had something to do with the pandemic in terms of inquiries and households coming through, but those are just hunches. Possibly people considering their lives, what's important in their lives, etc., etc. So that those are the kind of assumptions that we've got. So whilst not as good as the previous year, 83 is still a good outturn in terms of the number of approved households for the year. And again, it's not just about kind of numbers, but we're also very keen to ensure that we're bringing people through who are going to have the right skills and characteristics to meet the needs of the children who require adoptive placements. As part of the process, all of our prospective adopters go through preparation training. That's delivered internally. We do that on a regional basis. Most of this would have been done virtually. We've moved back to face-to-face delivery of that. But even though that was delivered virtually, we got very positive feedback from our prospective adopters about their experience of preparation training. So that's positive. So during the year, we went on to place 101 children for adoption. And again, that's more or less the regional average as far as we understand it from the previous 5 years. The really positive thing about last year is that we were able to place over 90% of those children with adopters who'd been assessed and approved within our region. In previous years, on average, the partners had placed around between 60 and 70% of children with their own adopters. So we see that as a real achievement. What that means is that we're able to place children within our region. If we haven't got sufficient adopters, then quite often that means going out to what we call interagency placements, where we're placing children quite often at very far distances. We place children in Devon, often in London. Clearly there's a cost involved in that, but more importantly, it just makes all of the transitions, introductions with adopters, all of those kinds of arrangements that support a really positive transition for children into their new homes. It makes all that stuff more difficult. So the more children we place within region, the more assured we can be that we can really support those transitions well. And then we can go on to support those children and families going forward. Much more difficult where we're working with adopters from different agencies spread around the country. So we see that as one of our key aims, and certainly during 2021, that was achieved really effectively. In terms of timeliness, I've said a little bit. So there's two key indicators called A10 and A2 for the nerdier of us here. A10 is the 3-year average, so that's how long it takes on average for children who enter care to move in with their adopted family. The England average is 445, or was last year. The Staffordshire average was 352, so that's 352 days from a child entering care to moving in with their adoptive family. Still sounds like quite a long time, but what you have to remember is that 6 months of that is care proceedings, a minimum of 6 months. So it's not a local authority decision to place a child for adoption. We need to secure a placement order through the outcome of care proceedings for children. So until we have a placement order, local authority cannot place a child for adoption. So our other kind of key indicator is around how long it takes from the point of getting that placement order, so court authority to place a child for adoption, to matching that child with a family. The England average is 196 days, and the average for Staffordshire children is 166 days. So again, we're below the England average there. Again, you know, there's not, these figures don't tell us everything. You could be performing very well as a regional adoption agency, but masking a lack of ambition. So, you know, what I would say is that's a good outturn, but the statistics are not everything, because if you're ambitious and you're trying to place older children together in large sibling groups, children with additional needs, then sometimes that takes, well, we know it takes longer statistically to place those children. And we are ambitious. So of the children we placed, well, we placed 101 children, and 104 children received adoption orders in the year. And of those 104 children, 12 were aged over 5. Again, sort of understood to be statistically more difficult to find families for those children. So 12 of those children were over 5. 34 children achieved permanency in their new home with a brother or a sister, or more than one brother or sister. I think we placed a sibling group of 3. We've placed 2 sibling groups of 3 this year. I know that. And 4 children who were placed, who received their adoption orders, had a recognised disability. And 13 children came from backgrounds other than white British. So all of those are factors that make it more difficult and complex to find the right match for a child. And I think what that shows is that we retain our ambition in terms of finding adoptive homes for children. As I said, a significant amount of the work that we do is in relation to providing support. So it's all very well placing children for adoption, but we know that children who are placed for adoption have very similar needs to children in the looked after care system. So, you know, they will have experienced early childhood trauma. Even babies that come into care may well have experienced trauma, prenatal trauma. So we know all of that has an impact. We know that there's a high prevalence of things like fetal alcohol syndrome disorders in children placed for adoption, and obviously trauma and attachment issues more generally. So our support to families is really focused on ensuring that our adoptive families have a good understanding of attachment and trauma issues, that we support them, and our social work staff and non-qualified therapeutic staff support those families to embed things like parenting with PACE, so some recognised models of therapeutic parenting. We use TheraPlay. We've got various people trained to quite a high level in terms of delivering some of those skills to our families. But equally, we're able to draw on the government's Adoption Support Fund, and we make very good use of that. Over £1 million worth of therapeutic intervention drawn down from the fund on behalf of our children and families in the region last year. And again, I think just important to recognise that we also provide services for adopted adults. Some people may be aware that there's been a recent parliamentary report on historical adoption, and clearly some of the practice that you know, I guess none of us can be too proud of who are in the sector historically. So, you know, very different times where adopted children weren't told that they were adopted, were told very little about their background, very little about their birth families. So we're we're very much kind of moving into the world of modern adoption in Together for Children, much more open approach to maintaining what we're calling maintaining lifelong links, so maintaining those links with key members of birth family where that's appropriate and in children's best interests. And we're learning all the time from research that in general, even if that is slightly risky, it's still better. It's still better for children particularly as they go through adolescence, go through the normal kind of cycle of identity formation. That's what adopted young people tell us. That's what adopted adults tell us. So we are supporting all of that work, birth records counselling, supporting, we've got our very own small team of Davina McCalls who link up adult adopters with long lost birth family members. So we very occasionally get some quite wonderful stories in that part of the world as well. So there's a whole range of statutory responsibilities that we have to adopted children, their adoptive families and adopted adults too. And again, the feedback that we get from the people who use our services was very, very positive in the last year. So going forward, our kind of key priorities at the current time are continuing to try and reduce delay, which has been a challenge this year. We've placed more children in the first 6 months of this year, placed 66 children. So clearly we are heading for a year where we've placed well over 120 children during the year, which is significantly above the average for our partnership. So we are managing to do that. It's a challenge, but we've managed to match and place 66 children so far in the first 2 quarters of this year. We're continuing to develop our early permanence practice, so we're working with partners like Adoption UK to deliver specific programmes. We're working hard with providers around the therapeutic offer, and we are developing our own internal resources as we go. We want to further develop our practice around transitions and moving children to adoption based on some recent research and practice models from the University of East Anglia. So that's all of these things are quite complicated because we're having to work with 4 children's social work services across the region. So it's kind of about aligning practice and taking small incremental steps to get people thinking about new evidence and new ways of practicing. And we want to improve our ongoing support for birth families and particularly birth parents. So we have some support groups around the region and we want to develop those further, so that we can better support birth parents who've been impacted by adoption. But we know that by engaging those birth parents, we can help to support ongoing contact with their children, with children who've been adopted. So, and we know that, again, as I've said, that's beneficial for those adopted children and young people. So that's it really in conclusion in terms of our adoption performance. As I said, we are really proud that we've also been able to implement the Mockingbird family fostering model across our 4 local authorities. So the last launch was a couple of weekends ago in Shropshire. So all 4 partners now are delivering a Mockingbird constellation, it's called. So that's where a very experienced foster carer acts as what's called a hub carer, and we create a satellite of other foster carers around that hub carer who's able to offer overnight stays, support to family. It's about building really a kind of extended family around a group of foster carers. A really successful evidence-based model that's licensed in the UK by Fostering Network, so we've been working in partnership with them. And just to say that we are the first ever partnership to deliver Mockingbird across a number of fostering services. So I think it's operating in about 9 countries worldwide, and Fostering Network tell us that globally we are the first people to ever deliver the programme as a partnership. So that's a real first and something that we're really proud of. That's it.
Scott, thank you for that. That was really interesting. Any questions? Councillor Binnett.
On page 11, paragraph 24, where we use agencies. I have some concerns about that because in another life I'm a health and social care assessor, and I go round to various homes where they have children and adults and do health and social care with the staff. And I have noticed while I've been around that there are lots of changes of staff. There's lots of agency staff in there when you go into these homes. And I just have concern that some of the people who set up these homes in various areas, that they're not keeping their staff, and they're using all these agency staff, and it's just not giving the child much of a chance, because these children are ones that people don't want to adopt for whatever reason. So they are more challenging, I get that. But surely these staff need to be fully trained, and you need staff that are going to stay there and nurture these children.
I think we're in a fortunate position compared to other sectors in children's services. So adoption services generally, we are more stable in terms of our staffing. There's less kind of staffing churn. And obviously once our children are ensconced in their adoptive homes, then in the vast majority of cases, those children remain with those families forever. There are occasionally adoption breakdowns, but that's very, very rare compared to other forms of sort of permanent care for children. So, you know, it is an issue. It's a real issue for the sector, but I would say that we are slightly more insulated in the adoption sector from some of that churn and some of those changes.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to think I'm one of those success stories of the adoption system. I hasten to add not of this authority, but elsewhere down south. But one of the things I just wanted to understand, given the cost pressures that we have now with the cost of living and energy bills, etc., do you think we're likely to see the rise in numbers of children actually being fostered as opposed to being adopted, given the fact that there is funding available for these would-be parents? And then secondly, given the numbers that have been adopted, and obviously the realisation that the more we can get adopted, the less pressure it is on funding that we have to administer to the county council and look after children, etc. Do you think there is enough? Do we put enough resource into it to be able to, or if we had more resource, would we be able to deliver more children into adoptive parent situations? Thank you, Chair.
So in terms of the first question, are we going to be able to kind of maintain our recruitment of adopters given the cost of living crisis? It is something that we are, I guess, concerned about and considering. We are able to offer some financial support to some prospective adopters, and do in certain circumstances. So, for example, imagine three brothers and sisters that we're placing into a family together. So, you know, you've got a family that are going from 0 to 5 in many cases overnight. That's clearly going to create a lot of cost pressure. So in those circumstances, we might consider providing some adoption allowances for a time-limited period of time. That would be means tested. You know, obviously we go into household finances when we're assessing and approving adopters. And we want to make sure clearly that also, you know, the opportunity to adopt is available to people from all walks of life on all sorts of incomes. So there is some opportunity to do that, but it is limited. And obviously it is not a kind of statutory, it's not a statutory feature of the system whereby we have got to provide that funding. It's very much, case-by-case decision-making. However, I think in general, you know, people are very differently motivated. People who are coming to the world of adoption, who want to adopt a child, are differently motivated. And I'm not saying that foster carers do it for the money. That is absolutely not the case. But, you know, it is a kind of a more professionalised, you're in a different space as a foster carer. Clearly people are coming forward to adopt because they want to complete their family. And that provides different motivations. And I don't think that will ever stop, you know, regardless of the economic environment. But it is something we're concerned about.
Excuse me. I think what's also important to add is that every child that we're trying to look for a place for, or trying to move back to their family, because we've been working, every child is going to be completely different, isn't it? And adoption is not always going to be the right option for every single child. So I think it's important that, you know, we don't see adoption as a panacea for every child that comes into our system, because a lot of those children that we work with who start to go into the care system, our aim would be to try and work with the family to get the child back to the family where they should be. And of course, the older a child gets, the more difficult it is always to adopt. I'm sure Scott could tell you some figures, but you know, the younger the child, you know, babies are relatively straightforward to find a suitable family for. 13 and 14-year-olds is clearly more challenging, but that's where we are trying also to do work.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pardesh. Oh, sorry, I'll come back. Councillor Wilcox.
So I think you're probably just about to answer the question on resource, whether if you had more resource, whether you could place more children.
But I think Mark's point is really salient in terms of it's a court decision based on the context for that particular child and family. So, in fact, adoption numbers nationally have been dropping as local authorities become more focused on family kinship support networks and finding other ways of achieving permanency for children. So, you know, really adoption is only for a very small number of children where there really is absolutely no other option in terms of, you know, kinship networks and other forms of appropriate permanent care for those children. So, you know, we're yet to see how things play out in terms of the longer term decline in adoption numbers. But these are very individualised decisions that are very specifically around the context for individual children. So just kind of putting more resource into adoption services isn't necessarily going to kind of change that pattern, because it's courts that make those decisions ultimately.
Councillor Pardesh.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, our very high successful adoption rates is clearly a credit to the very good foundation work that is going on. My only question, Chair, is are there any specific steps we take to attract more adopters of BAME and disabled children, please?
So yeah, there's specific work. So there's quite a lot of work going on at a national level. So regional adoption agency leaders like myself meet together, and we have some DFE funding that sits behind the government's adoption strategy. We've used some of that funding to deliver national recruitment. So I don't know whether people saw any of the activity a few weeks ago over National Adoption Week, but there's quite a lot of high-profile media discussions taking place. And a lot of that work is, a lot of that work is focused on improving the kind of diversity of prospective adopters coming forward. So there's been some specific work done in specific regions. In the West Midlands, for example, there's been specific work around recruitment of black and ethnic minority prospective adopters. It's more difficult across our geography. You know, Staffordshire and Shropshire are not the most diverse counties, but we do what we can, and obviously we link in with all of the national recruitment materials in terms of the kind of messaging. And we've got the opportunity to work across the Midlands. So again, where we feel that we haven't got the right family to meet specific needs of children, for example, their ethnic needs and cultural needs, we do operate a kind of broader partnership arrangement with other regional adoption agencies in the Midlands. Clearly, you know, places like Birmingham, Nottingham, where there's kind of more diverse communities.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sutton.
I think it's just Scott hinted at, spoke about it at the very end. One of the advantages of working on that footprint of 4 local authorities is that when you are trying to match a child with a family, it gives you much greater scope across that for, potentially different ethnicities, people who are more willing to take sibling groups and other things. And as Scott pointed out, we do, work it's not just that footprint at the end of the day. If it's the right family for the right child and it's not within that area, we're not restricted to obviously that particular area.
Thank you. Councillor Egan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased that things are working out well. I have to say that I attended one of our events with our young foster children that we've taken on board. We met them socially, and I was very pleased to be sitting next to a young lady that meets her own parents regularly. So it's so nice that they're talking very freely about their adopted parents, and they're talking about their foster parents and going back, meeting their parents, whatever their circumstances. So I was really pleased that there's a link, if you like, to family involvement. I am too very concerned, like the councillor, about agency staff. And how do you go about choosing agencies to follow up with our children?
If we're using agency staff within our own agency, then there are clear vetting processes. Whenever we've used agency staff, they go through the same kind of rigorous recruitment processes that we'd use for permanent members of staff. So we do use agency staff. We tend to use people we know. We tend to use people who've been around the circuit, who've got a reputation. We will take up references from other agencies where they've worked. So that's the way that we do it internally. When we're using other agencies, such as voluntary adoption agencies, to in terms of utilising their adoptive families, again we are working on the basis of Ofsted. So we will take into consideration their most recent Ofsted inspections to assure ourselves of the kind of quality of work that agency is undertaking. And again, in the world of adoption, it's reasonably good. So there are very few, if any, inadequate adoption agencies in terms of their Ofsted rating. Almost all adoption agencies are good or outstanding. Many outstanding adoption agencies. So that's we just utilise the same kind of criteria as we use in terms of quality assuring any services.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of other points, if I could, Scott. I think we've already discussed it and alluded to the fact that this whole process of being regional improves choice and improves a best fit. And as Mark indicated there, it gives us that ability to look a bit broader. Given the fact that our strategy is to look locally, and I think you alluded to the fact that means introductions are easier and various other training and bits and pieces. However, following on from Councillor Pardesh's question, how do we ensure that we are looking wide enough if we are faced with those people that are harder to place? Because given the fact that the temptation must be, for all of the logistical issues that you talk through, to prefer, and there must be other reasons why we prefer locally, but how can we be reassured that there is a process, so should someone benefit from a broader look, that actually that isn't overlooked in the way that we move forward?
So yeah, there is a very, very clear process. So we know all of the children who are in proceedings with a plan of adoption. So we know when their likely final hearing dates are. So we're already family finding for children before they get their placement orders. So we work regionally across our family finding team. That's one of the functions that we host centrally. So we've got a number of family finders and what we call permanency coordinators, who are senior social workers who kind of track those children and do the work with those children. So we already know the children who are coming through the pipeline. We know how many approved adopters we've got available within our regional system. If it's not, almost by the point of placement order, we kind of know whether we're going to be able to match those children in region or not. We operate a kind of 4-week timescale, so we'll look internally for 4 weeks after a placement order. And then there's a national system called Linkmaker, which is a secure way of sharing children's profiles with approved adopters from across the country. So we subscribe to that. It's not cheap, but we commission that jointly across the 4 local authorities. And that allows adopters to consider children from anywhere in the country. So, there are a number of children. I think at this moment in time, there are between 12 and 14 together for children's profiles on that system. So those are children that, we would consider a match from anywhere in the country from.
That's really reassuring. I also think the fact that, you've managed to place 3 siblings and things like that is incredibly encouraging. Given the remit of these committees is normally about ensuring that the council uses its resources properly, whether that be people or finance. We do tend to look quite a lot at the facts and the figures, don't we? Because it is one of those things that we want to be the best. We want to get the most people into permanency and also in the shortest period of time, indicating or an indication that might be an indicator that we're working very efficiently. Given the fact that you already alluded to that every child is different and some of them are very challenging in placing, what confidence can we have in these figures? Are they skewed towards a small number who are difficult to place, so therefore take a long time? And I think Mark indicated that sort of babies, and I don't want to overgeneralise, are relatively easy. So how useful are these as an indicator, or are they heavily skewed by those more challenging young people?
That's a really good question, Chair. So, yeah, obviously when you kind of chunk up the data, the big numbers about, all of the children in England, then it is really careful. And, even when you're working with, cohorts of 100 plus children, the risk is that you kind of lose the nuance in terms of understanding what that means for children's journeys. So, yeah, the 3-year averages particularly, kind of, as you say, give us an indication of kind of general trends and where we fit into the national picture in terms of benchmarking. But what we need to understand is within that range, within that range of, let's say, 170 days that it takes from placement order to matching a child, some of those children will have been matched maybe 60 days after the placement orders. Some of those children will have taken 500 or 600 days, getting on for 2 years. There are, what we call our priority children, the children with the characteristics that make it harder for us to find families. So yeah, we are getting better in terms of our internal performance data management, if you like, of kind of understanding the more nuanced picture. So, we kind of currently keep, we're currently tracking all of the children who are kind of on their adoption journey, and we don't just kind of understand that as a kind of blunt average number. We're kind of understanding the range of the length of time it's taking for those children, and clearly, the longer it's taking, the more focus we want to have on those particular children. And ultimately, it might be that we're not going to be able to achieve a plan of adoption, and very occasionally that is the case. But we kind of need to come to that decision sooner rather than later, and not just let children kind of drift on with an unachievable plan.
No, thank you for that. I think it's, you know, if you talked about A10 and A5, and unless I'm reading it wrong, it looks like Staffordshire outperforms Together for Children in both of those. So if we were making, and I'm sure for all the reasons that you've explained about it being a regional function brings all extra value and all of that, but if we just looked at the figures, it looks like we'd be better off just doing it ourselves and not joining the regional. So I think the point I was trying to get to is there a greater value in us being part of this network than there would be on our own, and as perhaps is indicated by those figures? But I think you probably answered that. I think that was just a rhetorical question. The last one really from me as well is we talk a lot about permanency, don't we? And that's what this title is. And I think you also alluded to the fact that occasionally these things break down. And am I right in assuming that all of the work and preparation that we do, and it looks like we do a really good job, is to ensure that a child has permanency as they move forward? And like I say, I know you talked about the very rare occasions where they break down, but are there any other measures about how successful that work has been? Because presumably we must have some sort of follow-ups for a period of time after it to make sure that actually we've got those decisions right, we've matched people properly, and actually it's a benefit to both parties, because as you pointed out, I think adoption is very different to fostering, isn't it? It is about a lifelong commitment to a child. And I'm just wondering if there are any indicators that would suggest that we're getting it right.
It's another very good question. Because of the legal nature of adoption, you know, there's clearly no statutory or regulatory connection. So once the adoption order is granted, that's it. Those adoptive parents go off and live their lives, hopefully, without too much contact with us. We are getting much better at maintaining links and really promoting this sort of ongoing support to families. So we've got a very much kind of peer support model, kind of people helping people sort of model. We are supporting and encouraging the building of our adopter community, if you like. So there's a number of informal communities that meet, that share information on social media, on closed social media groups, and we work with those groups and we support those groups. We also commission Adoption UK, which is the biggest UK charity voluntary organisation supporting adopters. So we've got an adopter advisory board, so we ask them, so that they quite often run surveys or kind of working groups with adopters who've got particular experience in particular areas. So, for example, children who are having difficulty at school. So then they will go and canvass and survey our adopter community and give us feedback, and then we use that feedback in terms of developing our service. So it's very hard to kind of get really sort of good quantitative sort of information about the long-term outcomes. We rely on academic research. 2014, Julie Selwyn was the Beyond the Adoption Order was the last big piece of research. So, you know, that gives us quite a lot of practice evidence in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And there is the Adoption UK Barometer, which is an annual survey of adopters across England. Now, we're just talking to Adoption UK about whether they can refine their data so that we can see all the responses from our region. And then we can use that as a bit of a kind of quality assurance tool in terms of what our adopters are telling us about service delivery. That sounds very impressive, I have to say. I think that does go some way, and I think the fact that we're looking at research as well, properly done research, gives us all of that assurances. I don't think there's any other questions other than to say thank you for coming, thank you for the report. And I think most people will join me in just saying a big thanks to you and the team, because you make a real difference to young people's lives. So if you'd pass that on. Thank you very much. Item 5, young carers. Don't have anyone to prepare this thing or present it.
Well, I can say a bit, or the members
I take your members have had an opportunity to read through it. Yeah. I think we sort of covered it several times at various meetings, haven't we? Rather than go over it again, are there any issues that members wanted to raise? Councillor Eagle.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're doing, by the attendance that we've been being drawn into with these young people, I think we're on the ball with this, to be honest with you. I've read the report. It just sums up everything that we've talked about and what we've done and what we've got in the pipeline. So I'm really pleased with the report. I don't see that we need the people when we've been to these functions with the children. Yeah. We've been very assured, and I felt assured that we were doing what we should be doing and we're doing it at the right time. But I do think we need to keep track of it. I think there's follow-up should be done so that the kids can, the children who are carers, can see that we care for their caring. But I would like to see a further report, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we've sort of got that in the pipeline, I think, haven't we? And maybe even an opportunity to speak to those same young people again, or a different group at a time in the future. Councillor Wilco.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On the 5 questions that were asked of the young carers, I suppose my only concern is that there's not an easy answer, I'm sure. Is the final question when they say that they've lost their childhood. A lot of these youngsters, you know, they say it's not exciting, it's not fun, it isn't. It's very hard work, and I just want to make sure that the people that support them do all they can to, in some way, make sure that they don't lose out on everything of being a child, and there are opportunities for them to be children and do children activities rather than their whole life be taken up with having to be carers, because it really is, you know, it's really hurt. It's not hurtful, it's a real shame that they've been put in that position, and we want to do all we can to ensure that they have some activities that match their age, and that there is support put in to allow them to do that, and other people to step in for them at times. That's my, and I know it's not an easy answer, I know that, but, and I know, as Councillor Eagle says, you know, we need to keep on top of this and keep reviewing it just to make sure that, you know, these children aren't adversely affected too much that we can't step in and help them. Thank you, Chair.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think one of the motivations for us doing this in the first place was that recognition that this is a unique issue around young people. Other issues around young people are quite transactional, aren't they? You know, we see something happening and we want to safeguard them from it. This is unique in the fact that most of these young people, I get the impression, want to do this because it's a family member, it's a sibling, and actually our role is slightly different, because we could easily say, actually, that's the role of the state, so you can have your childhood back and the state will do it. However, I think most people would agree there is benefit for both parties if it's done in a careful way and an understanding way by a family member. And I think what we're trying to achieve here is precisely as you've pointed out, is to allow that to happen, because that's the best way. And it's not about local authorities saving money or, you know, or doing these other things. But by the same token, you can understand it must be difficult for a child actually to say they don't want to do it, because they're their family members, aren't they? So we do have that duty of care. I think we do have to make sure that what we are allowing these young people to do is carefully considered and thought through and is right. And I think the fact that we put that out to an organisation that has expertise in making sure that that happens and is open and transparent. And I also think one of the real benefits for the 3 of us who went on and met those young people is I was convinced that the organisation that managed this for us hadn't cherry-picked the people that would come along and just nod and say everything is fine, because they didn't, did they, for those of us that were there. It was very much about, and those comments were reflected in that. So I do think we were getting the true picture. I think it also throws up issues. If you remember, one of the young people, a young person who was there, was talking about the impact on her at school, having to repeat the story over and over again, teachers move on. And I think it had some real value in as much as it identified things like that. Certainly I wouldn't have thought of that in advance. And I think what it gives us is an opportunity to have those conversations, to remind schools who are very busy organisations that young people who are taking on these responsibilities have some concerns, and how we move forward with that. So I think what this report is about is not the facts and figures that we've just previously heard about how many are we doing it efficiently, are we spending the money right. It's about, do we have that nuanced understanding of how people feel. I think Councillor Burnett was indicated next.
Yeah, Derek Cookfield and I went to see some young carers at the New Vic, and they've got things in place for these children to do after school and various things. But the issue I found after speaking to one of the young carers was that he isn't allowed to stay on after school and do any extra activities. Not because he doesn't want to, or not because we're not providing the facilities, but because his mum could not leave him at school, take the other 3 siblings home who all have issues, and then go back and pick him up later. And he wasn't old enough to walk home on his own. So he was missing out on opportunities through no fault of his own, and not through our fault. How can we get to those parents and say, you know, we appreciate that you need the care of your eldest son to look after the other 3 siblings, but the damage it's doing him, and excluding him from joining in, you know, half an hour of football after school or whatever it might be, I think is terrible. And I don't know quite what we can do about that.
I think, well, first of all, I think we need to highlight some of that, don't we? We need to have a mechanism whereby we can learn those things, because until you went along, we'd have all have been ignorant of that. I think it's more about how our relationship with the provider, about how the providers picking up on this, what are they doing about that, and how are they feeding some of that information back to us. So I think, as Councillor Eagland said, it would be useful, I think, that we keep a watching brief over this as we move forward, and actually raise some of those issues with the provider. I have to say, from my limited experience, I was very impressed with the provider. Councillor Eagland.
Yeah, and after we had that meeting, like you, it stayed with me for a long time, you know, because we were so concerned about these children missing out on what's going on in their activities at school and social, and we were concerned. But I didn't get that impression from the children. After a while, they got too used to us. They opened up a bit, but there wasn't an overwhelming feeling that they were giving something and not getting anything in return. But since then, I've made a few tentative inquiries, and I understand that in senior schools and in junior, they have a responsible person, which we would call welfare officer, but they've got another name for it, and I can't for the life of me remember what it is. But there is somebody that they can go to if they're feeling insecure or unsure for anything that they want. That's the impression I get from where I live in Lichfield, in the schools. So I'm just wondering whether our welfare officers that look after these children, whether we could question them, what do they do if a situation like this happens, as the councillors just asked for? Because we didn't ask that question, did we?
No, that's certainly something I think that we could consider. Also bearing in mind, as a result of us doing this, it was highlighted about difficulties in schools. It was also highlighted, wasn't it, about some really outstanding people in schools. One individual was named particularly, who I wrote to. And also the provider is desperately trying to get the message to schools that they offer some free training to schools. So that was another action for me to take forward with the portfolio holder for schools. about ensuring that this, and I think if that training and awareness takes place, then hopefully we'll start to hit on some of these issues and find a remedy for them. I do think that sort of taking a step back and looking where we are, I think we should be rightly proud of the fact that we've done this work. We've identified the issues. We haven't got a perfect solution to them all. Perhaps the unique nature of caring by young people doesn't have a perfect answer for everyone. But I do think that it was valuable time well spent, and I think that the report that came from it is and should make things significantly better for those young people. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. I did want to speak on the last item that we had on the book. I didn't signify, you took... Yes, you did, yes, but you didn't call me in. And by, yes, I just thought I'd make a point of saying that to you, Chairman. So it doesn't happen again. Just on this point, I thought it was a really good meeting that we had with the young carers. I think that, yes, we can look at these reports that we get from officers, and they're absolutely wonderful, but it is nice to actually sometimes to have it straight from the, not being detrimental to the children, but from the children's mouths themselves. And I think that's what we got out of that meeting. And I thought it was a real positive, and I think they thoroughly enjoyed it themselves, actually, if I'm being honest, talking to us, opening up, and it took a little while at first, but they did open up to us, and I thought it was a very constructive meeting, in as much as they enjoyed talking about the issues they've got. And as you rightly said, there were some in schools that were good and some that maybe not so good. But I think this is part of what we've now put forward. You've rightly said you'll talk to the portfolio holder about it that's responsible for that, to make sure that it goes across the county, that all schools have that capability of young carers, for whatever reason, if they need to talk to somebody, there's somebody there that they can talk to. Again, though, sometimes I think it's official, and sometimes that's not what they want to be. That's not who they want to talk to. They don't want somebody that's in power. They just want somebody that they can just chill out with, for the want of a better word. They're using their terms, to chill out with, to talk to freely. So maybe in future, this committee that we sit on, at some point in the future, maybe we can have another meeting with young carers and follow up to that, and maybe different young people, you know, just to see whether it is getting across the county, because, and not just a postcode sort of feeling. So maybe that's something we can look into, Chairman. Thank you.
I think, I mean, obviously the feeling that I'm picking up is that we found out some facts that we didn't know. It hasn't, whilst it's been reassuring, it hasn't reassured us completely. There are still some outstanding issues. So I do think one of the things that we need to do is exactly what you've just suggested there, is maybe organise another one of these in, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months' time, and let's do it again, and just to see what that looks like, and also maybe to pick up on some of those welfare officers in schools. Let's perhaps see if the most appropriate way of getting some views from them. Councillor Egan.
I think that what we're doing is a good service to our children, and that's what our aim is here. But it's a good idea that you've hit on about informing the Cabinet Member for Education, and we can get some information from there to take forward to another meeting. So that's a good idea. I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Just make one point. Helen's report, by the way, is absolutely spot on. Thank you.
All done with that?
May I?
Please do. Please do. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Just very briefly, going back to the recommendations, I'm getting a feeling that everybody's comfortable with all of them, but there was one in particular that Mrs. Perry, you particularly picked up when we wrote the report, which was about agreeing for members to become young carers service advocates, and it was about what that would mean, what that service advocate would mean. And we had a quick look, and it's really for members to say if they're comfortable with this, but it's, as the chairman says, there is a lot of work there already, some free training and support that picks up a lot of the issues and addresses a lot of the issues that young carers shared with us, things like retelling their story. There is a process there that the respite team, the young carers team, have already got in place for schools to use, but perhaps schools might not know about it, or it might not be a priority. So it's about really raising the profile of the service within schools, and that's the role of the advocate. So I briefly, because Mrs. Perry asked me to just define what that would look like, and this is what I briefly put down, so it's for members to say whether or not they think this is what you feel it would be the role of yourselves as advocate. So taking every opportunity to raise the profile of the young carers service, so that will be outside and inside school, raising awareness of the young carer service offer in schools, because the information goes into schools, but schools are so busy, if it's not flagged with them regularly, they perhaps wouldn't put it as a priority. And where members are school governors, ensure schools have fully considered and taken advantage of the young carers offer and assure themselves of the support and provision for young carers within that school. Does that sound reasonable? So that might be then something that you would like the chairman to share with the portfolio holder to take into school as something that not just the membership of this committee, but more broadly, the councillors would like to take forward as young carer advocates.
I'll certainly do that then. And also, I just thinking out loud, I wonder whether we ought to have maybe an agenda item on the main council meeting, that so all elected members are aware of it and should be doing, rather than just a small number on this committee. Lovely. Has anyone had the chance to look at it and is happy with it?
Do you want me to
Yep, if we could.
a few things? Thank you, Chair. So one or two things following on from that. Obviously, members will be aware that initially to this meeting we were expecting the Staffordshire Safeguarding Board annual report. Unfortunately, the independent chair who would have attended to present that report was called away to something that couldn't be rescheduled. So that will now come in January. It means January, your 5th of January meeting is quite a lengthy meeting. I apologise for that, but unfortunately we couldn't do anything about that on this occasion. At the last meeting, members looked at discussed the possibility of meeting with a joint meeting with the Police, Fire and Crime panel and the Commissioner to look at the Peel report. The Chairman and the Chairman of the Police, Fire and Crime panel and the Commissioner have met since to discuss that. And I think that the intention now is that the Police, Fire and Crime panel will meet with the Commissioner to look at the Peel report, and you as Chairman, Mr Spencer, will be invited to sit in on that. But then separate to that, the Commissioner will come to this committee at some point in the future to discuss not just the Peel report, but a range of issues that come under the guise of the crime and disorder role that this committee has. So that will be a meeting in the future. We're not sure when that will be, but it will be after the meeting that Police, Fire and Crime panel have to look at the Peel report. And another just to highlight that the query at the last meeting about the family improvement boards and an item for that, I emailed you recently to explain that is going to be that's part of the family hub development, explaining what the council, why the meetings have been cancelled, and we will include information on that when we look again at the Family Hub item, which will be on the work programme. We've had a new request for pre-decision scrutiny item on the house project, which is about children in care, and they've asked to come to February. And then finally, just a reminder that we've got an informal work programme planning at the end of this meeting.
Do that. Item 7, I don't think we have any other business, do we? That's the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much for coming. I know it was flooding everywhere and difficulties and traffic and all of that, so thank you for battling your way through. And yeah, who's coming to the, is it 1:30 that we're meeting? Or?
Well, it's or at the conclusion of this meeting, so it's
oh, right,
this
we
committee.
could do it now. Yeah,
we can roll, if we formally
far better.
finish the webcast,